In the summer of 1922, I came east to learn the bond business. I rented a small house in West Egg, a district on Long Island Sound not far from New York City. My house was modest, squeezed between the vast estates of the newly wealthy. Next to me stood a grand mansion, modeled like a French chateau, owned by a mysterious man named Great Gatsby. His name was known, but little about him was. Across the bay was East Egg, where the old wealthy families lived in elegance and tradition. One evening I drove over to visit my cousin Daisy Buchanan. She lived there with her husband, Tom Buchanan, a man I had known at Yale. Tom was powerful and imposing, with an air of arrogance that came from money and privilege. Their mansion was magnificent, overlooking the water, glowing in the summer light. Inside, Daisy and her friend Jordan Baker lounged in white dresses, their movements light and deliberate, as if they floated just above the surface of life. Daisy's voice was soft and enchanting, drawing people in without effort. Tom's presence was loud and forceful, filling the room. As we sat down to dinner, the phone rang. The atmosphere shifted sharply. Jordan leaned toward me and quietly explained that Tom's mistress was on the line. Daisy tried to remain cheerful, speaking about her little girl and laughing in a fragile way, but there was tension behind her smile. After dinner, I drove back to West Egg. The night was calm and quiet. As I approached my house, I noticed a figure standing on the lawn of the mansion next door. It was Gatsby. He stood facing the water, still and alone. I watched as he stretched his arms out towards something in the distance. I followed his gaze and saw a small green light at the end of a dock far across the bay. When I looked back, he had disappeared into the shadows of his house. Halfway between West Egg and New York lies a grey, barren place known as the Valley of Ashes. It is a stretch of land where the ashes of industry drift and settle, forming ridges, chimneys and dust that covers everything. Rising above this desolate area are the enormous eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, a faded billboard for an oculist with blue, unblinking eyes that watch over the grey land. One day, Tom Buchanan and I took the train to the city. When we reached the valley, Tom made me get off with him. We walked to a small garage owned by George Wilson, a pale, exhausted man who repaired cars. His wife, Myrtle Wilson, appeared from upstairs. She was in her 30s, thick-set and lively, with a certain boldness in her manner. Tom told her to meet us later at the train station, and she agreed secretly, while her husband looked on without understanding. Tom and I waited for her in Manhattan. Soon Myrtle arrived, and together we took a taxi to an apartment Tom kept for their meetings. It was a small, stuffy place on the top floor. Myrtle immediately began acting like a woman of great importance, changing her dress and adopting a commanding tone. She invited her sister Catherine and a couple named McKee to join us, and soon the apartment filled with loud voices, perfume, and cigarette smoke. As the afternoon passed, Myrtle became more and more extravagant. She talked about her marriage, claiming she couldn't stand her husband because he had borrowed a suit for their wedding and pretended it was his. She spoke loudly about Tom, calling him her man. Catherine, her sister, leaned toward me and whispered that neither Myrtle nor Tom could stand their spouses, and that Tom would never divorce Daisy because Daisy was Catholic, a claim that was untrue but passed around as fact. The gathering turned into a wild little party. People drank too much. The room grew hotter, the laughter louder, and everything began to blur. Myrtle put on airs demanding attention, ordering people about as if she were a queen. At one point, she began chanting Daisy's name, taunting Tom. Her voice rose higher and sharper with each repetition. Suddenly, Tom struck her across the face with the back of his hand, breaking her nose. Blood ran down her face. The party ended abruptly. The room fell into confusion. People rushed about with towels and cold water, and within moments, the spell of the afternoon was broken. Later that night, I left the apartment and wandered alone through the city streets before taking the train back to West Egg. The grey valley lay silent in the darkness, watched over by the sightless eyes of Dr. Eckelberg. Every weekend, Great Gatsby's mansion blazed with light and music. His gardens filled with people who had never met him, but came from the city in sleek cars or arrived by boat, eager for the food, the drink, and the spectacle. Servants worked all day preparing for these parties, laying out tables, decorating, and filling the bar with every kind of drink. At night, the orchestra played, lanterns hung from the trees, and laughter drifted out into the warm air. The guests were glamorous and careless, wandering through rooms, dancing on the terraces, gossiping and imagining wild stories about their unseen host. One evening, I received a personal invitation to one of these parties, something few people ever got. I dressed carefully and walked over. At the door, a man in a white jacket checked my name and led me through halls full of strangers. The party was already in full motion. A buffet of food stretched along the tables, the orchestra played a lively tune, and the crowd moved in waves from room to room, as if swept along by a single current. As I stood uncertainly, I recognized Jordan Baker in a group and joined her. She was as cool and self-contained as always. Together we explored Gatsby's mansion. Everywhere people whispered rumors. Some said Gatsby had killed a man. Others claimed he had been a German spy during the war. Some swore he was related to European royalty. No one seemed to know the truth, and no one cared to find out. Later, Jordan and I went into the garden to find somewhere quieter. We sat at a table with a few men in suits, drinking and talking. One of the men began speaking to me in a friendly way. As we talked, I mentioned that I hadn't seen the host yet. He smiled and said, "I'm Gatsby." I was startled. He was nothing like the grand figure I'd imagined. He was polite, calm and attentive, with a smile that made you feel as though he understood you completely. He spoke simply without boasting and made me feel at ease at once. A moment later, Gatsby was called away by one of his servants. Jordan and I watched him go. People continued to talk about him in loud voices, unaware he had been among them. Later, Gatsby sent a butler to invite Jordan inside for a private conversation. She disappeared with him for a while. When she returned, her face held a curious expression, but she said nothing about what they had discussed. As the night wore on, the party grew wilder. People danced on tables, sang loudly, and drove away in their cars shouting into the night. Around 2 in the morning, a crash echoed from the driveway. A car had gone into a ditch. Guests crowded around, laughing and pointing, treating the accident like part of the entertainment. No one seemed concerned about anything lasting beyond the night. Eventually, I left and walked home in the quiet dark. Unlike most guests, I had actually met Gatsby, but he remained as much a mystery to me as before. His parties were loud and dazzling, but he himself seemed to stand slightly apart, watching everything with that same calm smile. On a Sunday morning, a steady stream of cars rolled up to Gatsby's house once again. Guests came and went like waves, each group bringing new laughter, new music, and new stories. Rumors about Gatsby were everywhere. Some whispered that he was a bootlegger. Others claimed he had once killed a man or that he had been a German spy during the war. His name seemed to carry a strange excitement, as if everyone believed something different about him. One morning, Gatsby drove up to my house in his cream-colored car. He leaned out the window and invited me to lunch in the city. As we sped down the road, he began to tell me the story of his life. His voice was controlled, almost rehearsed, as if he knew I might not believe him. He said he was the son of wealthy people in the Midwest who were all dead now. He had been educated at Oxford, because all the men in his family had gone there for many years. He said he lived like a young prince in Europe after the war, collecting jewels, hunting and painting. He showed me a medal from Montenegro, a photograph of himself at Oxford, all to prove his words. He told me he had fought bravely in the war, and his tone left no room for doubt. For the first time, I began to sense the force of his will, the way he shaped the story of himself, and made others believe it. We crossed the Queensborough Bridge and entered the city. At a restaurant, Gatsby introduced me to a man named Meyer Wolfsheim. He was small, with cuff buttons made of human molars, and he spoke with a sly, familiar tone. Gatsby treated him with respect. As we talked, I realized Wolfsheim was a man deeply involved in shady business. He boasted about having fixed the 1919 World Series. When he left, Gatsby told me he was one of the finest men he knew, though there was something about Wolfsheim that unsettled me. Later that afternoon, as Gatsby and I walked back toward the car, I suddenly saw Tom Buchanan. Gatsby looked uneasy as I introduced them. The meeting was brief and awkward. After Tom walked away, Gatsby disappeared, leaving me confused by his sudden discomfort. That evening, Jordan Baker and I sat together, and she told me the truth Gatsby had kept hidden. Years earlier, Gatsby had met Daisy in Louisville.